This event happened in 2018. I worked at the SeaTac airport, which I still think is probably the smallest international airport that I've ever seen. The airport was so small that your workstation almost forced you to work alongside with other jobs. In this case, I worked in sales and we were stationed next to the wheelchair lane, which usually had one wheelchair pusher in the lane. Now keep in mind that I was only 19 when this incident had happened. I would say I'm a sweet person who goes out of my way to start conversations with people that looked bored since I worked night shifts at the airport. There was practically nobody flying, and there would be more workers than passengers. Therefore, we meet Mike around the age of 20 or 23. Mike was one of the wheelchair pushers who looked completely out of it, zoned out and didn't seem non-talkative. Me and Mike worked side by side in lanes, and he would usually come to give the person in the wheelchair lane a lunch break, and then proceed to go back to pushing people in wheelchairs throughout the airport. One day, my lead suggested that me and Mike should go out for tacos since we both kept complaining how nothing opens late at night and we were always hungry. Now we've known Mike for almost a month now, and his depressed, filled body started filling with joy every time we would find out that we were stationed next to each other. At this rate, we laughed it off, saying, no way, it would be too weird if we went alone. I was currently single and was no way attracted or interested in Mike like that. He then looked at me saying, hey, I actually know this amazing Mexican spot that's nearby if you're actually really hungry. They serve the best fish tacos. Not knowing the fatty that I am, I didn't decline. I loved eating late at night and Mike never gave me stranger danger vibes. I agree because I don't see the harm in going out to get tacos before I sleep. We traded numbers and I headed home before him since I clocked out an hour before he does. Now when I arrived home, I was getting dressed to go out to eat again, and the plan was to just meet up at the spot since the Mexican spot ended up being only about 5 minutes away from my house. I get a text from Mike saying that he wants to pick me up. Mike kept refusing because I just finally got my driver's license and the place was only 5 minutes away from my house. After almost 40 minutes of us insisting how we're going to get there, I finally gave in and had him come pick me up, which I would later regret. Now, I was a bigger girl, like we're in the 200 zone compared to Mike, who was very thin and short, so I wasn't worried if he attempted to do anything with me. I told him to pick me up along a street down because I didn't really want him to know where I lived at exactly yet. His beat up trash Toyota pulled up and we headed to the Mexican spot. We got our food and it was amazing. That we went for seconds and we had a good talk watching the soap opera on the TV. After we were done, we got back into his car where he was supposed to drop me back at home, but he never stopped. Looked at me and he said, "Can we talk in private? I know a spot." I kindly refused and told him that it was already 2 a.m. and that we should be getting back home. And he says, "Well, I know it's late, but I have a lot going on in my life. And you're the only person that's really hung out with me like this." The kind of idiot that I am, I said sure. Already seeing him drive down the road, I noticed so many red flags. As the streetlights start disappearing, more his mood and tone starts to change. A complete change in the atmosphere around Mike emerges. He starts telling me, "I sure do hate the society about women nowadays. They all have this stupid standard. I hate them, I hate them." And I'm like, did I just find a woman hater? Mike never rubbed me off as that kind of guy. He's just starting to seem every time he attempts to talk to a woman, they blatantly reject him. And me, a woman, is now a dummy that he's projecting all this female hate talk to. I was actually too stunned to speak because he became a whole different person during the drive. We arrive at an abandoned skate park in the middle of God knows where, and he tells me to get out. I listened, and here we are at 2 a.m. sitting on a cold concrete in freezing temperatures. He goes on and tells me that he hates women and how he would lie to his passengers that he takes in his wheelchairs, and to tell them that he's from the UK, and he speaks in a British accent. I was so overwhelmed. Like, what the heck was happening right now? He then would talk to me in a British accent from there on, how he would give his life up for God, and God was the only thing keeping him chained down. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, God would want me to castrate myself since he doesn't want me touching or near a female creature for my own safety. I was completely quiet the whole time, confused, questioning myself how much of a fool I was to even think that I thought this guy liked me. I was completely wrong. After 30 minutes, I was getting cold since this female creature that I was anemic. I told him that I would like to go home now, and he said, no, and proceeded to talk in a British accent about how God is coming to rescue him. I felt like it was in a movie because I couldn't believe what was happening. After he noticed, I started shaking my legs. He then says, I guess we can proceed back to the car. We go back to his car and a miracle happens. My mother calls me. I was expecting her to scream at me, asking me where I was and to come home like she usually does. But this time she said in a calm voice, where are you? In Vietnamese, I tell her that I'm out getting food with a coworker, and she says, okay, have fun, and hangs up. Again in disbelief that she didn't care where I was at almost 3 in the morning for the first time. I lie and say, oh, what, you want me to come home? Okay, I'll start heading home soon. And I pretend to hang up the phone. I look at Mike and say sorry that my mom wants me to come home now. He punches his steering wheel and sighs annoyingly loud, which gave me a jump scare for a moment. And he started the car and just sat there in silence, annoyed and gritting the whole time. He eventually starts driving, pulls out his phone and literally throws it at me. Open it, he says. Already exhausted and still not believing everything that was happening, my eyes grew fixated over the 100 notes on his phone. What is this? I asked. He says that it's song and poems that he wrote. He looks at me and says, go ahead, pick one. I don't quite remember what the note said. The only keywords that I saw were betrayal and woman, and they really stood out. He went, oh, that one, would you like for me to sing it to you? I straight up said no, and he continued to sing it for me, and the worst part, he did it in that stupid accent. The whole drive was him singing it to me in a British accent, how God's plan was to stray him from the human race so that he could overcome himself. I was zoned out the whole car trip. It all didn't feel real. My sense of danger got lower due to how exhausted I was, and how I was listening to this man and how he wanted to eradicate the female species off the face of the earth, and how our judgment day was coming. He dropped me off at my street and had the audacity to say, I had such a lovely time with you, darling. I slammed his door shut and run down my street before he had a chance to start up his car. After that incident, I ignored his messages, which he texted me 2 pages long on how he's sorry and how he believes God was here to put us together. How my Asianness was the only thing holding him back to committing real love to me. I stood in the back of my station to avoid talking to him. He would follow me back to my break room, and thankfully, my manager was there and yelled at him to screw off before he called security. He later got the hint that I wasn't interested, but he continued to stare me down every second he has in the same station with me. Thankfully, during that time, I found a second job and my whole schedule was changed and I never had to see him at work again. I saw him at Target once, but I quickly ran back to my car before he had the chance to walk up to me. I later found out that Mike was living with one of my coworkers on their couch. I told her everything he said and did, and she was completely shocked. She never saw Mike like that. He was really pretty quiet and would crack a joke here and there. I advised her that she should keep a close eye on him. She thanked me for relaying all the information, and eventually he was forced to move out later in the month. This story takes place in a small Canadian city this past spring, just as the snow had melted and going outdoors became bearable once again. I had been living with my parents all winter, so the season change arrived just in time to prevent my stir craziness. After work, I like to break up my routine and venture out of the house, even if just to go for a drive. Those are my thoughts on the evening the story was set in. I haven't seen one of my good friends in a few weeks since our work schedules often conflicted. When we did have some time, we would usually park somewhere secluded and smoke a few joints. This happened regularly enough that we usually ended up at The Spot, our de facto meeting location. The Spot was located on the campus of a local college, on the outer edge of the city. It was easily accessible to us both, relatively quiet, and there was never a cop to be seen. There were normally a few people parked at various points around the parking lot, probably doing the same thing that we were, but they kept out of each other's business. By night, the sea of empty parking stalls felt entirely our own. My friend and I arrived at the spot a little after 9 p.m. We parked in a small lot adjacent to a much larger one because we didn't want to be noticeable. The lots had one main entrance to the road, and were separated to the left and to the right. Also to the left was the roadway toward a campus building, which looped around to the building's front entrance and exited through the parking lot where we were. From our parking spot, we had a full view of the main entrance, as well as anyone coming or going from the larger lot. However, a number of huge elm and pine trees obscured our view of the larger parking lot, creating a sense of seclusion from anyone who may be over there. We turned off the car and began to catch up, chatting and laughing for what seemed like hours. We opened the window to air out the car, and began to hear a distant voice coming from behind the trees. A man was speaking frantically to someone. We could not hear another person. Several minutes of this went by, and then he finally appeared. From a distance, we saw him illuminated under one of the campus's street lamps. He appeared to be a young man, dressed in a t-shirt and blue jeans, and was clearly yelling into his phone. He was too far away to make out any other characteristics. He began to walk down to the main entrance toward the road away from my car, and eventually disappeared into the dark. We had been on edge since we first heard the voice, so we were relieved to see him walk in the other direction. 20 minutes passed and we had all but forgotten about him, quickly getting back to the details of each other's latest highs and lows. Our city is known to be somewhat dangerous at night, but we didn't feel much danger near the college. It had become our philosophy that anyone approaching our car at night did not have any good intentions, but we had the distinct advantage of 4 wheels and an engine. As we continued to talk, something started to feel out of place. In my periphery, I began to catch flickers of movement from the shadows toward the road. I turned to the right and saw this same man walking back toward the parking lot from the road. This time, he no longer was on his phone. We watched him in a slight daze for a few moments. He kept a steady pace and walked a straight line in our direction. He was still several hundred feet away, but a sense of eeriness began to build. We both expected that he would turn back to the large lot, to his car somewhere past the trees, and he did not. It became clear that he was walking directly toward my car. As he passed under a street lamp, we saw it, a long, solid bar in his right hand. At this point, a crushing wave of terror soon came over both of us. "Go, go, go!" My friend screamed in my ear. I started the car up and put it in reverse. I turned away from him and toward the campus building, hoping to escape by circling the loop and exiting through the roadway's entrance. As I pressed on the accelerator, I caught a glimpse of him. He was sprinting through the trees to block us off at the entrance. About halfway around the loop, I stopped and began to turn around. My fight-or-flight response was in full effect, and we had chosen the latter. The size of the roadway meant that I had to do a 3-point turn, kicking my adrenaline into overdrive. My friend began to scream again. "He's running right towards us." He had abandoned his plan to block us at the entrance and began to run directly toward the car. The distance between us quickly shrank. Finally, I was able to turn around. The maneuver likely took 10 seconds but felt so much longer. My foot hit the gas and I sped back around the loop. I now had a full view of the figure sprinting again through the trees, trying to trap us for a second time. I sped through the parking lot to where we had sat peacefully a few minutes before. Just as I had made it to the exit, he appeared on the left out of the trees. My foot was still in the gas. Because it was so fast, I didn't get a good look at him, but all I remember is the angry look on his face, his teeth bared and perhaps yelling in defeat. He had his arms thrown up in the air, with that solid object still in his right hand, and we sped down the road and further into the city. My heart rate didn't return to normal for half an hour. We drove around for a little bit, stunned and recounting the details of what had just happened. We were eventually able to laugh about it, thinking about how dumb we were for allowing ourselves to get trapped so easily. We didn't go back to the spot again. The backyard seemed like a better fit for us. Perhaps this man had a broken down car, perhaps he was a parking enforcement officer. I like to think that there is some rational explanation and what we did didn't almost get us mugged or assaulted or murdered. That said, I'm glad we didn't stick around to find out. This happened in 2005 during Christmas vacation. I moved away for college and came back home to visit for the holidays. Spent a week in my hometown in a snowy state. On my last night there, my friend and I decided to go sledding at 3 in the morning. We get in her car and we both go down a few times. We're both at the top of the hill and she's about to get ready to go down again, but I stop her. She asks what's wrong, and I tell her that I have a bad feeling. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up and I felt nervous. I told her that we needed to leave now. We drive back to my family home and we lived in a town where no one really locked their doors. The crime was almost nothing and all the neighbors knew each other. When we got back, something told me to lock all the doors. And then I checked the windows and several were unlocked. My flight was only 4 hours away to get back to campus. I slept for maybe 2. I wanted to see the snow and smell the fresh air, so I stepped outside. I looked at a huge pine tree that we had in the front or side of our yard. I always thought the way the snow laid on the branches looked so beautiful, and something caught my eye. What should have been pure, fresh snow was littered in huge man-sized footprints. They wrapped around the tree and went towards the backyard. I was thinking that maybe my uncle had been out there smoking or something, just thinking of anything to rationalize why those prints were there. That same feeling came back to me when we were sledding, the anxious and paranoid feeling in the pit of my stomach. I look to my left and I see a man. He's running and he's sprinting, staring straight at me. He was probably close to 300 pounds and maybe 6 feet, and for his size, he was really fast. I froze in fear with the realization that he's not just going on a morning jog, and that he's coming for me. I tried to move several times, but I was almost too scared. With everything in me, I opened my front door and slammed it shut and locked it. I ran to the window and looked out onto my porch to see the man standing there. He had his hand on my door. He turned his head and I followed his gaze to the man in the white van. The guy in the van throws up his hands in a gesture to say, "Well?" The runner just threw up his hands and shook his head. The runner walks to the van, gets in, and they drive away. With my heart still pounding, I wake up my friend and make her walk around the house with me. There we find the footprints that went to every door and window around my house. She too tried to rationalize it all, but to me, I know that if he had reached me, I wouldn't be writing this post. The malicious look on his face as he ran told me everything that I needed to know.